Welcome back to My Voice is a Weapon podcast. I'm your host, Rod Grom. Alright, so I'm back. I'm returning today. I tried coming back yesterday, but too many things to do, and one thing led to another, so I couldn't do it yesterday, but I'm here today. And I wanted to speak about something that has been bothering me for some time. This notion, we need to clearly stop treating freedom of speech as a conundrum of some sort, of any sort. What I mean by this is this notion that some way, somehow, people that defend free speech only defend it because it allows for it. It gives permission for hate speech or for violence, and there's several problems with that line of thinking, with that type of trying to manipulate what the reality is about free speech as a whole. Let's say that free speech does allow those sorts of behaviors. It does allow for violence, and it does allow for hate speech. Now, if it does, in what context does that entail? Because if we have to analyze free speech only through that point of view, the problem is that the influence and interpretation taken from what has been said by someone can be completely off base. It can be completely off base with what the reality of what has been said. One example of this is, if you allow me to take a little bit of historical context to introduce what I want everybody to understand this. So, historical context. For example, Hitler interpreted very wrongly, in a very wrong way, what Nietzsche used to say, used to think, and used to write about. That led to this idea that Nietzsche allowed Hitler to do the horrible things that he did. But it's absolutely wrong, because the interpretation and the influence were taken from a completely different angle from what Nietzsche was really trying to communicate. And that's where this idea that free speech allows for hate, or let me correct myself there. The idea that absolute free speech allows for hate speech and for violence is wrong, precisely because of this notion that it allows for this influence and interpretation to be taken in a completely different direction from what the communicator is trying to do. So that's the problem. There's a lot of vague interpretations. It's one thing when you have someone who is clearly trying to make people act violent and saying, okay, yeah, let's take action and kill these people because of this, this, and this. One thing is that, which is, it can be taken as a threat, it can be taken as a very poor choice of words. But the problem is, sometimes other types of communication get taken to that extreme when they're not really charged with that type of literature. So when you want to censor those types of things, the problem with is that I have with this is exactly who is taking action against the free will of someone to say whatever they want, and why are they censored them, and where's the line? Because you're not just censoring someone who gets their freedom of speech taken away from them. You're also taking away perhaps the choice of many to actually listen to that person. Maybe they want to know what that person has to say. Jordan Peterson recently said something very interesting regarding the situation of former President Donald Trump, who has been blocked and completely banned by Twitter, and blocked and banned by YouTube to a certain extent. I don't know if it's completely or not, but anyways, what Jordan Peterson said is, he says that he actually wants to know what Donald Trump wants to think, regardless of agreeing or disagreeing with him. It's good to let him say what he's really thinking. Give him the platform to say what he really thinks. It's a good way for even the opposite people who have opposite ideas to be to know what he really thinks. It's dialogue. It's healthy. Even if you don't agree with that person, even if you consider that person a foe. And Jordan actually says that he wants to get the opportunity to interview Trump, but because of the deplatforming of certain people, and in this case President Trump, he's not allowed to do that, because if he gets to interview Trump on his YouTube channel, he'll probably get blocked. The content is not going to be uploaded, or it's going to be taken down. So we are missing the opportunity to actually listen to people because of this idea that if you go against the grain of what the establishment wants you to think, then everything you say is hate speech or considered to be hate speech. And the mold of that creates a very dangerous pattern, because one of the problems with this is you're helping the case of many people who are hypersensitive about many things. And you say anything that goes against the grain of a certain line of thought, and they get upset immediately, and they start to scream and cry and shout at you that you're a racist, that you're a homophobe or transphobe or a sexist, because what you said is interpreted a certain way. That's the danger. Now, people who communicate to this level in public are always in danger of saying something that gets that somebody that gets influenced by that a certain type of way, and it can go in two different directions. One, that person probably does a confidential complaint on internet at any platform, sending a letter, an email complaining about the issues with what has been said and why it's dangerous and why that person shouldn't be allowed to say those things. The other way is the creating a space for protesters of an extreme level on one side of the bargain to go and do violent protests and then go and say that they are not the violent ones, they are not pushing for violence, but because of certain person who said certain things, they feel the need to take action to get that person off any sort of public platform to which they can actively communicate with their audience, with their fans or public. And it is very strange because normally in the past, the right would be the one pushing for that type of agenda. Now today we're in such a weird world where now the left is pushing for that agenda. And you can see that the bad argument for going against free speech is so off base because they only use the argument of, oh, you can't say hateful things. All right, let's go with that. Let's go with the idea that I'm not allowed to say hateful things. But then what? What really is hateful thing to say? Because if you go, for example, to a comedy show, comedians often use specific groups of people to be offensive against them, not because they're picking on those people, but because they're using them as an example of a bench for their material. They're using them as an example to ridicularize human beings in general. Yes, probably, you see a comedian pick on Jews for certain things. That doesn't mean that he hates Jews. It doesn't mean that. It just means that he's taking the those stereotypical things about the Jews and making fun of it, just as he could be making fun of black people or white people or any other community. Now, who gets offended by that? Normally, someone who is at a comedy show enjoying the show until their community gets called out for something and they feel personally offended, right? When most normally a comedian making fun of a black person, you don't see black people in the audience jumping on the comedian saying, hey, you're racist. Because that doesn't happen, because we know what comedy is all about. Now imagine that type of field when you have this notion that we have to endorse this idea that hateful speech is real, because it is not. I understand that in a historical connotation, perhaps yes, there was um, hateful speech, but nowadays, in the context that we're living on, we're way past that. And we need to understand that things have changed to a level where absolute freedom of speech is the only way to go. It's good to have freedom to say whatever's on your mind, and it is also, and this is key and it is very important, it's also good to be able to listen to other people. If you go against the grain of what absolute free speech means and you attack it on the side with those ridiculous notions to say that freedom of speech is a way to defend hatred or hate crimes, it's completely absurd, it's off pattern, and it's off base. And I think that there's a correlation between this idea that now, obviously, the right wing will defend freedom of speech because we're criminalizing hate speech so much that they feel cornered. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Because if you think about it, there's more people on extreme sides of the fence because of censorship. If we had more dialogue and absolute freedom of speech in all spectrums, we would have less extreme people, or less people getting to one or other extreme side of the fence. So that's why I also, correlating to what I said on the last podcast, that nowadays, especially today, and most especially in this COVID era with the pandemic and everything that it entails, societies are at risk of finally breaking down, and I think it's good. It's not. There's nothing bad about it. Smaller communities, it's the way to go. Rebuilding small communities is going to be way healthier than continue to live on this society-driven way that came only because of industrialization. Now, industries are the past. Technology is the present, and artificial intelligence is the future. So the way to go is obviously rebuild smaller communities, separate big societies and break them down, avoid big cities and rebuild smaller communities so that we continue to have job opportunities, and it's a better way to communicate. It's easier to manage a smaller community. It's easier to build a stable government based on a smaller community. When you have those big ass countries like Russia, US, Australia, Brazil, and mix that with a high number of population, it becomes a nuclear bomb at some point, because when you mix too many people together in the same pot, obviously you're going to create diversion, and it's going to get explosive at some point. So we need to fix this. We need to fight for freedom of speech, or absolute freedom of speech. And the reasoning goes beyond just giving people the freedom to say whatever they want, but also giving them the freedom to choose who they want to listen to, because that's very important. That's what Jordan Peterson was trying to he wasn't trying, he actually said, it's what he said. I would love to know what Donald Trump thinks. And in order for me to know, I need to be able to listen to him. If I'm not able to listen to what Trump says, no matter if I agree or don't agree with him, you're priving me of getting to understand what Donald Trump really represents. Because maybe everything they say about Donald Trump is true. But it is impossible to know that if we don't allow him to say the things that he has to say, that he wants to say. So it's a little bit of a bargain, but I think it works. And I fully agree with Peterson on that note. And not just Jordan Peterson. I think most of us advocate for absolute freedom of speech. Or perhaps, maybe, just maybe, this is an illusion, and it is true that most people perhaps wants censorship to exist. Unless it's censorship against them. Alright, I'm gonna wrap it up for today, and once again, thank you very much, and I will see you down the line, maybe on Friday. See you next time. Take care. Goodbye.